Right outside the glass doors of my own company, a woman 14 years younger than me pointed a manicured finger at my chest and told me to get out. The Miami heat was suffocating, baking the asphalt into a shimmering wave that smelled of hot tar and expensive exhaust. Harper stood blocking the entrance. She wore a tailored silk blouse I instantly recognized from a recent, unexplained corporate expense report. Her stance was wide, her chin tilted up, intoxicated by the secret affair she thought she was winning. "Never set foot in this building again," she hissed, her voice cutting through the humid hum of coastal traffic. "Julian runs things now. You are done here." I did not scream. I did not drop my ceramic coffee cup. I just looked at her, feeling a cold, precise focus settle deep in my ribs. For 3 years, I had quietly managed the supply chain empire housed inside this glass tower, letting my husband wear the title of Chief Executive for Public Relations, while I steered the actual ship. Now this junior executive was attempting to evict me from my own legacy. I took a slow sip of black coffee. The dark liquid burned pleasantly on the way down, grounding me. I let the silence stretch. I watched the pulse beat in her throat as her false confidence began to fracture under my steady gaze. "I just fired your boyfriend," I said, my tone as casual as if I were discussing the weather. "He is no longer the CEO." Her hand froze mid-air. The sharp clicking of her stiletto heels halted on the concrete. Before she could form a coherent response, the automated lobby doors slid open behind her. My husband stumbled onto the sunlit pavement. Julian did not look like a man who had just been wrongfully ousted from his corporate throne. He looked like a man who had just stepped onto a hidden landmine. Sweat beaded along his hairline, dampening the collar of his bespoke Italian suit. He ignored Harper entirely, his wide, panicked eyes locking onto mine. "Before we continue into the wreckage of my marriage, I want to ask you something. How old are you? And have you ever had to look someone in the eye while systematically dismantling the lie they built their life on? Let me know in the comments below, and welcome to Salt Vengeance. My name is Sophia Bush, and at 42 years old, I was about to teach my husband the true cost of betraying the architect of his reality. The terror radiating from Julian made perfect sense, provided one understood the quiet discovery I had made 48 hours prior. 2 nights ago, the sterile white glow of a dual-monitor setup in my home office had illuminated a staggering truth. The house had been quiet, the only sound the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I had opened the quarterly overseas logistics expenses, planning a routine weekend audit. Instead, I unraveled a labyrinth of dummy vendors and redirected capital. $4 million siphoned methodically to an offshore shell corporation. My fingers had hovered over the keyboard, the air in my office suddenly feeling thin and inadequate. I traced the routing numbers, matching them to a series of accounts Julian had recently opened under the guise of international expansion. I pulled the incorporation documents for the South American vendor. The registered agent for the Shell Corporation was a familiar name, Harper Reed. He was using company capital to build a golden parachute for himself and his mistress. It was a calculated insult, though hardly a surprise, to a woman who had constructed this entire distribution network from a hospital bed. 3 years earlier, I had lain in a sterile room recovering from a severe infection that nearly stopped my heart. I remembered the harsh smell of medical-grade bleach and the uncomfortable pinch of intravenous lines taped to the back of my hand. My laptop had rested on my lap, burning hot against my legs, as I negotiated our primary international shipping rights. I built our empire through a haze of heavy painkillers. During that same week, Julian had been supposedly networking on my behalf at an exclusive golf resort in Boca Raton. He sent brief texts about the coastal breeze and his putting handicap, complaining about the resort food, while I secured the contracts that made him rich. But the missing capital was only a surface wound. Digging deeper into the shadow ledgers, my cursor landed on a digitized legal folder. Inside sat a forged power of attorney. Julianne had targeted the deed to my family's ancestral Florida estates, preparing to transfer my legacy into a blind trust controlled by Harper. He thought I was still the exhausted, recovering spouse he could easily manage. He failed to realize he was playing a game I had invented. This morning, standing in our marble foyer before the morning commute, the air had smelled of his expensive citrus cologne. I had reached out and carefully adjusted the heavy custom chronometer on Julian's wrist. The cold metal housed an encrypted micro-recorder, a silent passenger I installed after my initial suspicions took root weeks ago. I smoothed the lapel of his tailored suit, my fingers brushing against his chest. I felt the steady, calm rhythm of his lying heart beneath the expensive fabric. "Time always catches up to us," I whispered, brushing a speck of imaginary lint from his shoulder. He smiled, flashing the charismatic, practiced grin that always won over our board of directors, oblivious to the snare tightening around his neck. "I have a big day today, Sophia," he said, kissing my cheek. "Lots of restructuring. I might be late." Now standing on the scorching pavement, I met Julian's frantic gaze. Harper finally found her voice, turning toward him with her hands on her hips. "Julian, tell her," she demanded, her tone shrill. "Tell her she has no power here." Julian did not look at her. His chest heaved as he took a step toward me, raising a shaking hand. "Sophia, we need to go upstairs, now. We need to talk about this privately." I handed my empty ceramic cup to a stunned security guard standing near the entrance. "There is nothing to talk about, Julian. Your access credentials have been revoked. Security will pack your personal items and mail them to you." I turned my back on both of them and walked through the sliding glass doors, leaving them stranded in the brutal heat. The air conditioning of the lobby hit my skin, a stark contrast to the boiling tension I left outside. I needed to get to my desk. The Cayman Islands wire transfer he initiated was scheduled to clear at exactly 5 o'clock. To freeze the master ledger and recall the funds, I needed to bypass the internal firewall. I stepped into the private executive elevator and swiped my master keycard. The polished steel doors slid shut, cutting off the sight of Julian arguing frantically with Harper on the pavement. The cab began its smooth ascent. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, letting out a slow, controlled breath. The public confrontation was over. The physical threat was neutralized. Then my phone vibrated in the pocket of my linen trousers. I pulled it out, the screen illuminating the dim elevator cab. A high-priority alert from the corporate banking portal flashed across the glass. My grip tightened on the device. Julian had not just scheduled the multi-million-dollar transfer. Anticipating a lockout, he had set a dead man switch. The notification glowed with cold, undeniable urgency. The offshore wire transfer had bypassed the 5 o'clock hold. It was initiating right now. The elevator doors parted with a soft chime, releasing me onto the plush carpet of the executive floor. The urgent notification from the corporate banking portal still glowed against my palm, a digital countdown mocking my momentary triumph in the parking lot. The dead man switch. Julian had programmed the offshore wire transfer to execute the moment his primary building access faced a physical block. The funds were already moving. I bypassed my usual morning routine, striding directly toward my corner office with a singular focus. My assistant, a sharp young professional who survived in this industry by never asking unnecessary questions, stood up from her desk the moment she saw my face. I gave her one clear directive: convene the board of directors in the main conference room immediately. Sitting at my mahogany desk, I sent my fingers flying across the keyboard, tracing the digital pathways of the initiated transfer. Julian had buried a dual authentication protocol deep within the Shell Corporation architecture. My unilateral authority as majority shareholder was not enough to halt an automated cascade of this magnitude. I needed a formal, documented vote of no confidence from the board to trigger a total systemic override. Without that legal consensus, $4 million would vanish into the untraceable ether of international banking before the lunch hour. 10 minutes later, I walked into the main conference room. The space was a fortress of glass and steel, offering a sweeping view of Biscayne Bay. The air conditioning hummed, keeping the room at a crisp temperature designed to prevent anyone from getting too comfortable. The board members took their seats around the long table. These were individuals I had handpicked over the last decade. Financiers, logistics veterans, silent partners. They smelled of expensive leather, aged scotch, and calculated risk. They did not tolerate scandal, but they despised losing money even more. Before I could call the room to order, the heavy oak doors swung open. Julien stepped into the room. He had bypassed the lobby security, leveraging his remaining executive aura to intimidate a rookie guard. He clutched his signature gold smartphone like a weapon. The confident veneer was firmly back in place, masking the naked panic I had witnessed on the pavement minutes ago. He adjusted his bespoke tie, looking around the table with the arrogant smirk of a man who believed he held all the winning cards. I needed him to dig his own grave, and I needed him to do it on the official record. I let my shoulders slump, breaking my notoriously rigid posture. I forced a visible tremor into my hands as I rested them on the polished table. I took a shallow, ragged breath, looking down at the wood grain. When I raised my eyes to meet his, I allowed a sheen of unshed tears to gloss my vision. It was a performance, pulling from the genuine exhaustion I had felt 3 years ago in that hospital bed, weaponizing my past vulnerability. "Julien, please," I whispered, my voice carrying a desperate, fragile edge. "We can fix this. You do not have to destroy everything we built together. Just stop the transfer. Think about our marriage." The shift in his posture was instantaneous. Julien thrived on my perceived weakness. For years he had resented my silent control over the empire, desperate for any indication that I needed him to survive. Seeing me fracture in front of the board was an intoxicating drug. He stood taller, his chest expanding, as he looked down at me with profound pity. He abandoned whatever cautious legal script his lawyers had prepared for him. Hubris replaced self-preservation. "Sophia, you are being hysterical," Julien announced, his voice booming across the silent room. He turned to address the board, gesturing with his gold phone. "My wife is clearly unwell. The stress of the recent expansion has triggered a relapse of her past health issues. I am taking executive control of the offshore assets for the protection of this company. The Cayman accounts are locked under my biometric seal. The capital is secured, and frankly, Sophia is powerless to stop the transition." He let out a short, patronizing laugh. "I control the offshore equity. I control the future of this logistics network. You are all witnessing the unfortunate breakdown of a woman who can no longer handle the pressure." He felt invincible. He had just confessed to hijacking corporate funds in front of the entire governing body, framing his embezzlement as a heroic rescue mission. My tears vanished. The fragile, desperate wife evaporated, leaving only the cold, calculating architect behind. I straightened my spine, my posture snapping back into flawless alignment. The sudden drop in my emotional temperature sent a visible ripple of unease across the faces of the board members. Julien faltered, his patronizing smile freezing on his lips. I reached forward and tapped a single icon on my tablet. The room was deathly quiet. A single bead of sweat formed on Julien's temple. It slid down his jawline, detaching from his skin and dropping squarely onto the glass screen of his gold smartphone with a faint tap. Simultaneously, the audio file broadcasted through the conference room's surround sound speakers. The recording was crystal clear, captured by the micro recorder hidden inside the heavy watch currently strapped to his sweating wrist. Julien's own voice filled the room, unfiltered and damning. "Harper, the $4 million is untraceable. I funneled it through the South American dummy vendors just like we planned. Sophia is too busy looking at the domestic ledgers to notice I am draining the overseas accounts. By the time she realizes the capital is gone, we will be drinking champagne in the Caymans, and she will be holding an empty bag." The audio clipped off. The silence that followed was suffocating. The board members stared at Julien with pure, unadulterated disgust. These were sharks, and Julien had just bled in the water. The chairman of the board, a ruthless venture capitalist from New York, leaned forward and pressed the recording button on the central console. The board acknowledges the recorded confession of felony wire fraud and embezzlement, the chairman stated, his voice devoid of any warmth. We hereby vote for the immediate termination of Julian Pierce as Chief Executive Officer, effective this exact second. All access revoked, all accounts frozen. Julian looked at his gold phone, then at the faces of the people who had just stripped him of his power. He had lost the company. He had lost his shield. But cornered animals are the most dangerous. A slow, chilling smile spread across Julian's face. The panic faded, replaced by a dark, toxic satisfaction. He slid his phone into his pocket and leaned his hands on the mahogany table, locking his eyes onto mine. "Go ahead," Julian sneered, his voice dropping into a menacing whisper. "Take the company. Freeze the offshore accounts. But you might want to call your property manager before you celebrate Sophia." My pulse hitched, though I kept my face an impenetrable mask. "You spent so much time watching the corporate ledgers, you forgot to watch your own backyard," Julian continued, his voice dripping with malice. "Did you really think I would risk everything without securing leverage? I used a forged notary seal 3 days ago. I transferred the deeds to your grandfather's orange groves and the historic coastline property into a blind trust." He leaned closer, the scent of his citrus cologne suddenly nauseating. "Harper is the sole trustee. The moment you finalize this termination and lock me out of the company, a contingency clause in that trust activates. Harper will liquidate the ancestral estates to the highest commercial bidder. You fire me, Sophia, and you lose your family legacy forever." Julian stormed out of the conference room, the heavy oak doors shuddering in his wake. The board members immediately began drafting the formal termination documents, their previous hesitation replaced by a cold, unified drive to protect the firm. I did not waste time watching them work. I returned to the sanctuary of my corner office, locking the door behind me. I opened a secondary application on my tablet. The luxury penthouse Julian had purchased with embezzled corporate capital was technically a company asset, which meant it remained wired into our central security grid. I accessed the internal camera feeds. The high-definition screen blinked to life, displaying the marble corridor outside the 50th floor residential suite. Julian arrived moments later, his bespoke tie loosened his expensive suit, looking rumpled and inadequate. He jabbed his keycard into the electronic reader. A red indicator light flashed. Access denied. He swiped it again, his movements frantic, his palms slapping against the thick mahogany door. He pounded his fist against the wood, yelling something the silent hallway cameras could not pick up. Inside the penthouse, the interior feeds revealed a much different scene. Harper was not pacing in distress. She was moving with the precise, calculated efficiency of a woman executing a rigid survival protocol. Harper Reed was never just a naive subordinate swept up in a workplace romance. 2 years ago, she entered this logistics firm as a hungry junior compliance officer. She possessed a razor-sharp intellect and a desperate ambition to escape her modest working-class roots. During a routine internal audit, Harper had stumbled across the initial dummy accounts Julian created. She held the digital evidence necessary to destroy his career. Instead of reporting the theft to human resources, she attempted to leverage the information for an unearned promotion. Julian, recognizing a threat he could not buy off with mere corporate advancement, chose a different tactic. He seduced her. He pulled Harper into his bed, effectively turning the ambitious whistleblower into a silent co-conspirator. He made her a trustee of his illicit blind trusts, binding her fate directly to his own. She became his blunt instrument against me. But she was also his most vulnerable victim, trapped in a web of financial complicity. Now, watching the interior feed, I saw the exact moment her grand illusion shattered. Harper stood in the center of the sprawling living room, surrounded by open designer luggage. She already knew about the boardroom disaster. Word traveled through the corporate hierarchy faster than an electrical current. Julian confessing to federal wire fraud on a recorded device meant federal agents would be raiding this very apartment before sunset. The sinking ship was taking on dark, freezing water, and Harper was securing her own lifeboat. My personal cell phone vibrated on the glass desk. The caller ID displayed a familiar mobile number. I answered on the first ring, placing the device on speaker. "He is locked out," Harper said. Her voice lacked the arrogant venom from the parking lot confrontation. It was tight, pragmatic, and laced with pure adrenaline. "I can see him on the security feed right now," I replied, watching Julian kick the heavy door on my tablet screen. "He looks rather upset." "He is a fool." Harper snapped, the sound of rustling fabric echoing through the receiver as she continued packing her belongings. "He actually thought he could outmaneuver you in front of the board. I told him to liquidate the Florida estates yesterday, but he wanted to gloat. He wanted to hold them over your head to ensure his escape. Yet here you are, Harper, calling the exact woman you told to vacate the premises less than an hour ago. Tell me why." Because I possess the forged notary seal and I hold the physical deed transfer documents, she stated, her tone shifting into a sharp, transactional negotiation. "Without these original papers reversing, the blind trust will tie your ancestral properties up in probate litigation for a decade. The state will seize the land while the courts untangle his financial mess." She paused, letting the harsh legal reality sink in. She was correct in her assessment of the law. Modern American property disputes involving contested trusts often destroyed the very assets they sought to protect. "I want $1 million wired to an untraceable cryptocurrency wallet," Harper demanded, her breathing shallow. "And I want full legal immunity drafted by your corporate counsel, stating I was acting under extreme emotional duress. You get your family legacy back, and I disappear without a trace." I leaned back in my leather chair, watching her pace on the monitor. She was folding a cashmere sweater, her phone wedged between her shoulder and her ear. She was incredibly smart, but she underestimated the vast depth of my preparation. "No," I said quietly. Harper stopped moving. The cashmere sweater slipped from her grasp, falling onto the hardwood floor. "What do you mean, no, Sophia? You will lose the estates. You will lose the orange groves your grandfather planted." "You misunderstood your current position, Harper. You are demanding a ransom for a hostage you do not actually control. I anticipated this exact betrayal the moment I discovered the Shadow Trust. My attorneys filed a preemptive injunction on the deeds at the county clerk office at dawn this morning. Your trust is legally frozen. The documents you hold are worthless paper." Silence stretched across the phone line. On the security feed, I watched the color drain from her face. The realization hit her with physical force. She had no leverage. She had no immunity. She was just an accomplice holding a bag of forged, useless documents. "You are going to let the federal investigators take me down with him," she whispered, the mounting panic finally bleeding through her composed facade. "I am going to let the consequences of your choices run their natural course." I corrected my tone, unwavering. "You tried to steal my personal history to fund your unearned future. Have a pleasant afternoon, Harper." Through the speakerphone, a sharp, defining sound punctuated the end of our brief alliance. Harper dropped her phone onto the mattress and grabbed the lid of her leather suitcase. She slammed it down, the heavy metal clasps snapping shut with a crisp, definitive click. That audible snap severed her ties to Julian Pierce forever. She grabbed the handle and dragged the luggage toward the private service elevator, abandoning the man she had helped orchestrate this entire disaster. Out in a marble hallway, Julian finally realized the mahogany door was never going to open. He pressed his forehead against the polished wood, his shoulders heaving with ragged breaths. His gold smartphone lit up in his hand. I watched as he desperately typed a message to his mistress, receiving only a bounced delivery notification in return. She had blocked his number. He was entirely isolated. The federal authorities would be mobilizing soon. The board of directors was already preparing to hand over the recorded confession and the shadow ledgers to the authorities. Julian had mere hours before his passport triggered a national alert. He pushed himself away from the locked door. His posture shifted from defeat to frantic, primal survival. He could not access the penthouse. He could not access the corporate accounts. But he still believed he held one final untouchable asset. the Cayman Islands wire transfer. The $4 million he assumed had successfully bypassed my security measures during the boardroom distraction. I tracked his phone GPS signal on my secondary monitor. The blinking blue dot moved rapidly away from the downtown residential district. He was not heading toward a defense lawyer. He was not heading toward the local bank branch. The digital signal merged onto the southbound expressway, accelerating toward the private executive airfield situated on the humid edge of the city. He was running. He intended to board a chartered jet, flee American jurisdiction, and rebuild his stolen life on a tropical shore using his staggering offshore equity. I closed the security feeds and picked up my tailored suit jacket from the back of my chair. I dialed my lead corporate attorney, instructing him to meet me directly at the tarmac. Julian thought he was escaping into the sunset with a fortune. He did not realize I had already rewritten the ending to his story 6 months ago. The drive to the private airfield took 20 minutes. I sat in the back of my hired town car watching the Miami skyline shrink in the rearview mirror. Beside me sat Richard, my lead corporate counsel. He was a pragmatic man who billed by the minute and never wasted a single second on emotion. His leather briefcase rested on his lap, containing the culmination of a year of silent, meticulous preparation. We arrived at the sun-baked tarmac well before Julian. A chartered twin-engine jet sat idling near a private hangar, the heat distortion rippling the air around its fuselage. The scent of aviation fuel hung thick in the humid breeze. We boarded the aircraft, bypassing the flight attendant, and took our seats in the plush leather cabin. The air conditioning hummed, a cool contrast to the sweltering Florida afternoon outside. 10 minutes later, a black sedan skidded to a halt near the boarding stairs. Through the oval window, I watched Julian emerge. He looked disheveled, the pristine veneer of the morning thoroughly destroyed. His gold smartphone buzzed relentlessly in his hand, lighting up with frantic alerts from the banking portals he could no longer access. He ignored them, taking the metal stairs 2 at a time. He believed he had reached his sanctuary. He believed the $4 million had successfully breached the international waters of Cayman Island banking. Julian ducked through the cabin door, barking an order at the pilot to initiate immediate takeoff. He turned toward the passenger cabin, ready to collapse into a luxury seat and leave the wreckage of his life behind. Instead, he found me, sitting across the aisle, holding a fresh cup of coffee, with Richard, calmly reviewing a stack of legal documents beside me. Julian froze. The false bravado he had worn like a shield in the boardroom shattered for a fleeting second, only to be hastily reassembled. He let out a harsh, breathless laugh, running a hand through his damp hair. He tossed his gold phone onto the polished mahogany table between us. "You are relentless, Sophia," he said, his voice echoing in the confined space. "I will give you that. You actually chased me to the runway. Did you come to beg me to come back, or did you just come to watch me leave?" I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the gentle vibration of the jet engines humming beneath my feet. "I came to ensure you understand the exact parameters of your departure." Julian smirked, leaning against the bulkheads. He crossed his arms, oozing a toxic, unearned confidence. "My departure is fully funded. You froze the domestic accounts, but you were too late to stop the wire. My Cayman funds are beyond American jurisdiction. I have $4 million sitting in a shell corporation that you cannot touch. Your little boardroom coup cost me my title, but it bought me my freedom. Harper is gone, the company is yours, and I am flying into the sunset as a very wealthy man." He was so proud of his scheme. Julian always possessed a dangerous combination of high charisma and low diligence. During the early years of our marriage, before the logistics empire expanded across 3 continents, I handled the grueling midnight negotiations while he attended the glamorous networking dinners. He loved the performance of business, but he despised the tedious reality of paperwork. He signed whatever I placed in front of him, trusting my brilliance to sustain his lavish lifestyle. That fundamental laziness was the very weapon I had utilized to orchestrate this exact moment. "You are correct about one thing, Julian," I stated, setting my coffee cup down. "The Cayman accounts reside outside standard domestic jurisdiction. However, You are operating under a severe misconception regarding who actually owns that shell corporation." His smirk faltered. He uncrossed his arms, taking a cautious step forward. "I own the Shell Corporation. My name is on the incorporation papers. I established the dummy vendors." Richard opened his leather briefcase. The crisp sound of unzipping leather cut through the low hum of the cabin. He extracted a single thick folder and placed it on the table next to Julian's gold phone. "Mr. Pierce," Richard began, his tone perfectly flat and professional, "are you familiar with the corporate tax restructuring filed in the third quarter of last year?" Julian stared at the folder, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing his features. "What does a tax filing have to do with my offshore accounts?" I leaned forward, clasping my hands together. "A year ago, I noticed the initial anomalies in the South American logistics budget. You were sloppy, Julian. You used the same routing numbers for your illicit transfers that you used for your legitimate corporate expenses. When I discovered the dummy corporation in the Cayman Islands, I did not confront you. Confrontation would have allowed you time to move the capital. Instead, I waited for the annual Q3 corporate tax restructuring." The color began to drain from his face as the trap slowly illuminated in his mind. "During that restructuring," I continued, my voice steady and cold, "I drafted an intricate set of legal amendments. I slipped a very specific document into the stack of 70 pages requiring your signature as Chief Executive Officer. You did not read the contract, Julian. You never read the contracts. You were complaining about a delayed tea time at your country club while you signed away your escape route." Richard tapped the open folder with his gold pen. "The document you signed, Mr. Pierce, was an irrevocable corporate reclassification. You legally transformed your private offshore shell corporation into a registered philanthropic subsidiary of Apex Logistics. It is a charitable fund designed to support international trade education." Julian staggered backward, hitting the bulkhead. His breathing grew shallow and rapid. No, that is impossible. You cannot do that." "You did it yourself," I corrected him. "Your signature is verified and notarized on every single page. The moment you signed that reclassification, the Cayman accounts ceased to be your private sanctuary. They became the sole property of the Apex Logistics corporate umbrella. Which means, Julian, when the board of directors voted to freeze all corporate assets this morning, they also froze your philanthropic subsidiary. The wire transfer you initiated successfully reached the Caymans, but you cannot withdraw a single cent." He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing as his brain struggled to process the magnitude of his defeat. He had spent a year stealing $4 million, only to unwittingly donate it to a corporate charity I controlled. His balance was exactly zero. "You have nothing," I told him, letting the reality sink into his bones. "You have no title, no mistress, no leverage, and no money." Before Julian could form a response, the cockpit door unlatched. The pilot stepped into the main cabin, holding a digital tablet. He looked between Julian and me, his expression tight with professional annoyance. "Mr. Pierce," the pilot said, raising his voice over the engine noise, "I just received an alert from the charter company dispatcher. The wire transfer you used to secure this flight just bounced. The payment method has been declined by your financial institution." Julian turned toward the pilot, his eyes wild. "Run it again. There has to be a mistake. Run the secondary card." "We ran every card on file," the pilot replied firmly. "They are all returning insufficient funds or hard freezes. I am sorry, sir, but company policy dictates we cannot leave the tarmac without cleared payment." The pilot turned around and disappeared back into the cockpit. 5 seconds later, the low, steady vibration of the aircraft ceased. The agonizing, high-pitched whine of the jet engines spinning down filled the cabin. The sound stretched out a descending mechanical wail that perfectly mirrored the collapse of Julian's entire existence. Then the engines cut out entirely, plunging the luxurious cabin into a suffocating, dead silence. The air conditioning halted. The heavy Florida heat immediately began to seep through the fuselage. Julian was trapped inside a metal tube, going nowhere. He looked at the empty leather seats, the polished wood, and finally down at his gold smartphone resting on the table. His chest heaved as panic truly seized his nervous system. He had lost the primary battle, but a desperate man always clings to his final secret. I watched his eyes dart toward the device, his pupils dilating. He snatched the phone from the mahogany surface, his thumbs flying across the glass screen. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was attempting to access a secondary emergency crypto wallet he kept hidden for a catastrophic scenario just like this. He thought it was his final lifeline. He did not know that logging into that specific digital vault was the exact trigger required to detonate the ultimate trap I had set with the federal government. The silence inside the grounded aircraft felt heavy. Without the auxiliary power unit running, the Florida afternoon sun baked the aluminum fuselage, turning the luxury cabin into a stifling greenhouse. I sat back in my leather seat, crossing my legs, maintaining a perfectly steady outward calm. Richard remained beside me, quietly packing his legal documents back into his leather briefcase. The crisp snap of the brass locks echoed like a gavel striking a judge's bench. Julian stood a few feet away, his chest rising and falling in erratic, shallow bursts. His manicured thumb struck the glass surface of his gold smartphone with frantic intensity. He muttered under his breath a desperate mantra of numbers and passwords. I watched a drop of sweat trace the contour of his jawline and fall onto his silk tie. He was attempting to access his final insurance policy. Early in our marriage, Julian had developed a deep fascination with decentralized finance. He viewed cryptocurrency as a playground for the wealthy, a place where traditional rules did not apply. He believed it offered an impenetrable shield of anonymity. What he failed to grasp was that anonymity only existed for those who understood the underlying architecture. Julian only understood the marketing. "You think you cornered me?" he spat, his eyes glued to the illuminated screen. "You think you took every dollar. You always underestimated my foresight, Sophia. The offshore charity account was a decoy, a secondary holding tank." He looked up, a feral, desperate grin twisting his features. The heat inside the cabin was rising rapidly, causing his cheeks to flush a deep, unhealthy crimson. "I funneled $500,000 into a decentralized ledger," he boasted, his voice tight with adrenaline. "Untraceable tokens, liquid capital scattered across a dozen anonymous blockchain nodes. You cannot freeze a decentralized wallet. You cannot reclassify a digital token with a corporate tax form. I just need to verify the primary access key, and I can walk off this tarmac, disappear across the border, and rebuild." He struck the screen one more time, his thumb lingering on the glass. "Checkmate, Sophia." I did not react to his triumphant declaration. I simply raised my ceramic cup and took a slow sip of the black coffee. It had gone cold, the bitter taste grounding my focus. I set the cup down on the mahogany table with a deliberate, soft clink. "Do you remember the third year of our operations?" I asked, keeping my tone even, devoid of any mocking inflection. We secured our first major government shipping contract. The compliance requirements were staggering. The Department of the Treasury subjected our entire financial infrastructure to a rigorous audit. Julian frowned, his thumb still resting against the phone screen. He clearly did not understand why I was reminiscing about corporate history. "I remember the audit," he scoffed, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We paid a team of consultants a small fortune to handle it." "You paid the consultants to manage the public relations," I corrected him. "I handled the auditors. I spent 4 months sitting across from federal agents learning exactly how the United States government tracks illicit capital. I learned that the illusion of anonymity is the most effective trap ever designed. The authorities do not build walls to stop criminals. They build funnels." I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table, holding his panicked gaze. "When I uncovered your shadow ledgers last year, I did not just monitor the outbound wire transfers. I tracked the digital currency conversions. You used a centralized exchange to purchase those tokens, Julian. You used a registered corporate IP address to establish your so-called anonymous wallet." His feral grin began to falter. The air in the cabin grew visibly thicker, the stagnant heat pressing down on us. 3 months ago, I continued measuring every word for maximum impact, I initiated a confidential meeting with a contact at the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. As the majority shareholder of Apex Logistics, I officially flagged the missing $4 million under the Bank Secrecy Act. I reported a suspected internal money laundering operation. Richard adjusted his tie, his expression stoic, confirming the legal reality of my statement. I did not merely freeze your assets this morning, I explained, watching the dawning horror wash over Julian's face. I provided the federal investigators with the exact blockchain addresses connected to your secondary crypto vault. The government designated that specific digital wallet as a monitored honeypot. It sits under an active federal seizure warrant. Julian stared at the phone in his hand. His knuckles turned white. The authorities have been waiting for the suspect to claim ownership of the stolen funds. I whispered the words hanging in the stifling air. They needed the perpetrator to log in, bypassing the security encryption from a traceable device, thereby providing irrefutable proof of possession. Julian looked down at the screen. The authorization progress bar he had initiated moments ago reached 100%. The login executed. He had just claimed ownership of the stolen capital. Instantly, the interface on his device vanished. The screen flashed a stark, glaring red. A solid block of text appeared bearing the official seal of the Department of Justice. A federal seizure notification locked the device, rendering the hardware entirely useless. Julian had not unlocked his salvation. He had pulled a digital tripwire. The realization of his fatal error hit him with the force of a physical blow. His legs gave out. He stumbled backward, his shoulders hitting the polished wood paneling of the cabin wall. All the arrogant certainty, the manipulative charm, and the unearned superiority drained from his body, leaving behind a hollow, ruined shell. His fingers went numb. The golden smartphone slipped from his trembling grip. It fell through the tense, silent air. The device struck the metal track of the cabin floorboards. The sharp, pathetic crack of the shattered glass echoed through the grounded jet. A spiderweb of fractures obscured the glowing federal seal, the broken device a perfect mirror of his dismantled life. He stared at the ruined phone, his chest heaving, unable to formulate a single coherent word. I did not offer him a lifeline. I did not offer him a parting insult. I simply observed the inevitable outcome of his own profound arrogance. Then a new sound pierced the heavy Florida heat. Faint at first, but growing rapidly louder, the high-pitched wail of emergency sirens drifted across the tarmac. The automated tripwire had instantly pinged the local field office. The federal agents, already on standby due to my prior filings, were mobilizing. Through the oval window of the cabin, I saw the flashing red and blue lights of unmarked government vehicles turning onto the access road, speeding directly toward our isolated runway. Julian turned his head toward the window, his eyes wide and vacant. The flashing lights painted his pale face in alternating strokes of crimson and blue. He was stranded inside a sweltering aluminum cage, stripped of his stolen fortune, abandoned by his complicit mistress, and robbed of every ounce of leverage he thought he possessed. There was no secret account left to access. There was no charming lie left to tell. The federal convoy breached the security gate, tires screeching against the hot asphalt as they surrounded the chartered jet. Heavy doors slammed open. Dark figures in tactical gear moved toward the boarding stairs with purposeful, grim efficiency. I picked up my ceramic cup and took one final sip of the cold black coffee. The bitter liquid tasted exactly like victory. I swallowed it down, enjoying the profound silence of my own heartbeat, watching the man who tried to ruin me realize he had systematically orchestrated his own destruction. 3 weeks passed before I saw either of them again. The climax of our war did not unfold on a sunlit tarmac surrounded by federal agents, nor did it happen in a dramatic courtroom filled with spectators. It concluded inside a sterile, windowless federal mediation room in downtown Miami. The air smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and ozone from a nearby copy machine. The fluorescent lights overhead emitted a low, incessant hum, casting a harsh, unforgiving glare across the long, laminate table. I sat on the right side, wearing a tailored charcoal suit, my hands resting lightly on the surface. Richard, my lead corporate counsel, sat beside me, organizing a stack of pristine legal documents. Across the table sat Julian and Harper. They did not sit next to each other. A wide, unspoken chasm separated their chairs. The federal raid had fractured their toxic alliance into a million irreparable shards. They were flanked by a pair of overworked defense attorneys, a stark contrast to the high-priced legal talent they once assumed they could afford. There was no yelling, there were no tears, and no one begged for forgiveness. The threat of a lengthy federal prison sentence for wire fraud and document forgery had sterilized any remaining emotional outbursts. The Department of Justice had presented a very simple binary choice: proceed to trial and face a decade behind bars, or accept a deferred prosecution agreement heavily contingent upon full civil restitution and my personal cooperation. I held the keys to their freedom, and I intended to charge an exorbitant toll. Richard cleared his throat, sliding the first binder across the table. It stopped directly in front of Harper. She looked hollowed out. The designer silk blouses were gone, replaced by a cheap, off-the-rack blazer. The arrogant junior executive who had ordered me out of my own building was a ghost. Her shoulders slumped under the weight of her ruined ambitions. "Ms. Reed," Richard began, his tone clipped and professional. "Contained within this binder is the dissolution of the blind trust, alongside a full confession regarding the use of a forged notary seal. By signing these pages, you are relinquishing all claims to the Florida ancestral estates and returning the deeds to my client. In exchange, the corporate board will decline to pursue separate civil damages against you." Harper did not read the contract. She possessed enough intelligence to know she possessed zero leverage. She picked up a cheap plastic pen provided by her attorney. Her hand trembled slightly as she scrawled her signature across the bottom line. She pushed the binder back across the laminate surface, refusing to meet my gaze. The state-appointed mediator, a stoic woman with iron-gray hair, pulled the document toward her. She inspected the signature, retrieved her official seal, and pressed it down onto the paper. Thud. The heavy, satisfying strike of the notary stamp echoed through the silent room. That single, sharp noise finalized my definitive victory. The historic coastline property and my grandfather's orange groves were safe. Harper was disarmed. Richard retrieved the second binder, placing it squarely in front of Julian. My soon-to-be ex-husband looked aged. The golden tan from his golf outings had faded into a sickly pallor. His posture, once broad and commanding, was hunched. The federal honeypot trap had broken his spirit with surgical precision. "Mr. Pierce," Richard continued, tapping the open page, "this document executes the forfeiture of your remaining equity within Apex Logistics. You are signing away every share, every voting right, and every claim to the corporate umbrella. Furthermore, this agreement outlines the terms of your court-ordered restitution." Julian stared at the pages. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He looked up, his hollow eyes meeting mine for the first time in 3 weeks. He searched my face for a trace of pity, a lingering spark of the wife who used to cover his mistakes. He found only the cold, unyielding architect he had tried to destroy. He signed his name. The mediator stamped the pages. Thud. The transactional decapitation was finished. I stood up, buttoned my charcoal jacket, and walked out of the room without looking back. Fast forward 3 months, and the consequences of their betrayal settled into the logical reality of modern American society. Justice is rarely a sudden lightning strike. True justice is a slow, methodical, grinding wheel. Harper quickly discovered that the logistics and finance sectors of Florida operated on a tight, interconnected whisper network. Though she avoided a federal indictment, her reputation was radioactive. Every interview she secured ended the moment her prospective employers ran a background check. The awkward silences and polite rejections eventually drove her out of the state entirely. She was permanently blacklisted from every corporate suite in Miami. Last I heard, she had relocated to a small town in the Midwest, working an entry-level retail position, forced to rebuild her life from the very bottom rung of the socioeconomic ladder. Her designer luggage was likely gathering dust in a cramped studio apartment. Julian's fate was far more poetic. The deferred prosecution agreement kept him out of a jail cell, but it bound him to a rigid, unavoidable restitution plan. The courts mandated that he maintain steady, verifiable employment to pay back the remaining penalties and legal fees. Given his public disgrace, no reputable firm would hire him. I, however, offered a solution. Julian now works for Apex Logistics. He is stationed in a windowless cubicle on the ground floor of our secondary processing facility. His official title is Mid-Level Compliance Manager. He earns the exact state minimum wage required by law. His daily task consists of auditing the charitable grants distributed by our corporate philanthropic subsidiary, reviewing mundane data entries, and verifying basic expense receipts. The irony is exquisite. Every morning, Julian clocks into a beige cubicle to manage the exact same Cayman Islands fund he unwittingly financed with his embezzled millions. He tracks the money he tried to steal, distributing it to international trade schools. He reports directly to a lower-tier supervisor, who in turn reports to my board of directors. He is trapped in a corporate purgatory of his own making, forced to watch the empire he once claimed to rule expand without him. As for me, I did not just survive the wreckage of my marriage. I masterfully weaponized the betrayal to excise the dead weight from my ledger. I stood on the wraparound balcony of my reclaimed ancestral estate. The late afternoon sun dipped low over the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the sprawling orange groves and the classic Spanish tile roof of the main house. The salty breeze rolling off the Atlantic Ocean carried the sweet, familiar scent of citrus. It was the scent of my childhood, the scent of a legacy preserved. I leaned against the ornate iron railing, holding my signature ceramic cup. The black coffee warmed my palms. I listened to the distant sound of the waves crashing against the shoreline, a rhythmic, enduring beat that outlasts any storm. For years, I had allowed an inferior partner to stand in my light, believing compromise was the cornerstone of a successful life. I knew better now. Power does not belong to those who wear the loudest titles or the most expensive suits. Power belongs to those who control the details, who read the contracts, and who never flinch when the trap snaps shut. I took a sip of the dark roast, letting the profound peace of the evening wash over me. The company was thriving, my history was secure, the ledger was balanced. Thank you for riding out this incredible journey with me to the very end. If you felt that deep sense of satisfaction watching the pieces fall exactly where they belonged, tell me your favorite moment in the comments below. Do you think Julian's new desk job is the perfect punishment, or did he get off too easy? Your thoughts mean everything to me, so make sure you subscribe to Sophia Told Stories for more high-stakes drama and unapologetic revenge. Until next time, keep your ledgers clean and your coffee black. The dust settles, the ink dries on the legal decrees, and the quiet finally returns to the ancestral estate. When we look back at the wreckage of a shattered marriage and a dismantled corporate coup, it is easy to focus solely on the mechanics of the revenge. We marvel at the frozen accounts, the clever tax restructuring, and the satisfying thud of a notary stamp sealing a traitor's fate. But beneath the surface of this corporate warfare lies a much deeper, more resonant conversation, one that speaks directly to the heart of family responsibility, the legacy we build, and the long-term guidance we provide to the next generation. Peering at the ruins of Julian and Harper's ambitions, we see a profound failure of foundational values. Their collapse was not merely poor financial planning. It was a collapse of moral architecture. This brings us to a vital question for any parent in modern American culture. What are we truly passing down? In a society that often equates success with rapid wealth accumulation, corner offices, and the illusion of power, The true essence of family responsibility can easily become obscured. We spend decades building portfolios, expanding logistics empires, and securing trusts, hoping to leave our children a life free from hardship. Yet, as Julian's spectacular fall demonstrates, handing a kingdom to a person who lacks the integrity to govern it is a recipe for disaster. The ancestral Florida estates, with their sprawling orange groves and historic coastlines, represent more than just real estate. They symbolize the deep, enduring roots of a traditional family structure, roots nourished by honesty, fairness, and generations of quiet, unglamorous, hard work. Parenting is the ultimate exercise in long-term guidance. It is the daily, invisible effort of instilling a moral compass so that when faced with the intoxicating lure of shortcuts, a child possesses the emotional awareness to choose the righteous path. Julian possessed charisma and an undeniable talent for the performance of business, but he lacked the fundamental honesty required to sustain it. He was a hollow vessel, navigating his life through deceit rather than substance. When we raise children, the focus must shift from merely preparing them for economic competition to molding their character. We must teach them that true strength does not lie in how effectively one can manipulate a situation or deceive a partner, but in the steadfast refusal to compromise one's values even when no one is watching. A traditional family structure with clear boundaries and defined roles serves as the primary classroom for these virtues. It is within this framework that children first learn the delicate balance between individual desire and collective well-being. When a family operates with transparency, children learn that honesty is not just a moral ideal, but a practical necessity for maintaining trust. Julian's ultimate downfall was his isolation. By deceiving his partner, he severed the very connection that gave him strength. We must guide our children to understand that family is a collaborative enterprise. It requires the courage to admit fault and the grace to offer genuine restitution when trust is broken. Emotional awareness is the mechanism that makes this entire structure function. It is the silent language of a healthy home. Julian and Harper operated in a vacuum of empathy. They viewed the people around them as obstacles to be bypassed or tools to be utilized. Had either of them been raised with a profound sense of emotional awareness, the ability to understand the ripple effects of their actions on the lives of others, their choices might have been radically different. As guides to the next generation, we are tasked with modeling this empathy. Children absorb the unspoken dynamics of a household. They watch how parents handle conflict, how they treat their spouses, and how they react when a mistake is made. If a child grows up in an environment where deception is rewarded and vulnerability is punished, they will inevitably carry those toxic blueprints into their adult lives. Therefore, the concept of fairness must be consistently woven into the fabric of daily family life. Fairness is not about ensuring everyone gets an equal slice of the pie. It is about ensuring that actions have appropriate, logical consequences. When Julian was stripped of his stolen wealth and forced to work a minimum wage job to pay his court-ordered restitution, he finally experienced the fairness he had spent years trying to evade. It was a harsh, unyielding lesson that should ideally be learned in childhood, within the safe confines of a loving home. When parents shield their children from the consequences of their actions, they are not protecting them. They are disarming them. A child who learns early that a lie requires amends and that theft demands restitution grows into an adult who respects the boundaries of others and the sanctity of a promise. The story of Sophia's calculated reclamation is a masterclass in holding others accountable, but it also serves as a stark warning about the consequences of neglected moral development. We must ask ourselves if we are raising architects who build legacies on solid ground, or if we are inadvertently raising hollow men and women who will shatter at the first sign of real pressure. The American dream is often framed as a relentless pursuit of upward mobility, but the most enduring American families are those anchored by unwavering principles. They are the families who understand that a legacy of integrity is infinitely more valuable than a legacy of mere capital. As we navigate our lives making countless small decisions that shape our children's environments, we must remain vigilant. We must foster homes where truth is spoken, emotional intelligence is cultivated, and the weight of responsibility is embraced. Through this intentional, everyday guidance, we fortify the next generation against the destructive forces of greed. We are not just raising individuals, we are crafting the moral foundation of the future. If this reflection resonates with the quiet battles you fight in your own life to maintain integrity and build a meaningful legacy, I encourage you to join our growing community. Follow Salt Vengeance for more stories that dig beneath the surface of human nature, exploring the profound consequences of our choices and the enduring power of justice. In the end, the orange groves will continue to bloom, drawing their strength from soil that has been carefully tended for decades. We are all tending our own groves, planting seeds that will grow long after we are gone. When the inevitable storms roll in, testing the strength of the branches and the depth of the roots, the truth of our efforts will be laid bare. We are left to look into the mirrors of our own homes and wonder, when the winds howl and the illusions wash away, what kind of foundation will remain standing in the quiet aftermath.